Welcome to Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. Through each episode, Dave and his guests provide resources and assurances to build a company growth roadmap. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of Innovator Café, Dave Stevens.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovator Café. Today we are really blessed to have Abraham Safair as a guest. Abe has a very deep background that goes way back into government. He's a federal judge, he's an entrepreneur, an investor, going all the way back to the Reagan administration. He was instrumental in bringing down the Berlin Wall and many other events. And more recently, Abe has been involved in lots of regional politics around the Middle East and Africa and other places. And we're here to chat about that. Abe, welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be with you. I was not instrumental in bringing down the Berlin Wall, but here I am anyway. I was a small part of a great team.
Yeah, your modesty speaks volumes of you. Yeah. So let's talk about current events, Abe. Tell me what's going on in the world and your perspective on things. I'm very interested to hear that.
I think the world is in a state of relative chaos, actually. Of course, everyone here focuses on Putin and on Israel, Gaza, as the two major catastrophes that we are experiencing. But it's quite clear to me that they're just two of many emergency situations which appear to be the result of a complete disregard of international norms, even the most conservative international norms. And it greatly concerns me, because if people start routinely disregarding fundamental rules, such as the sovereignty of a given state that was accepted by the UN, or the rules about who you can kill in a combat and who you're not supposed to attack, or using a hospital as a base to launch missiles, all the basic rules that we've been trying to develop particularly since the First World War, and just before the First World War, when law-related issues concerning war and humanitarian behavior began to be developed. If we start to actually tear those down, not necessarily formally, no one's saying anything like that, but just in practice, that's highly significant.
Right. Well, is there a place in the world for the world police? What are Western civilizations doing to really, I guess, circle the wagons and try to address all these problems?
Well, mainly nothing. Mainly nothing. The Security Council is the power in the international community that decides whether to use force of any kind to deal with an illegal action under the Charter. And Russia and China and the U.S. Can block, as can the UK and France, can block any initiative along those lines. So if any of those entities is involved in this activity, or an ally of those entities is involved, they will tend to veto. So there's very little the Security Council has agreed to do about any of these situations around the world. I mean, Syria is a complete disaster. Ukraine, of course, and you're not going to get Russia voting to allow the Security Council to do anything about Ukraine. And in Gaza, we have a huge problem because it's very clear that there was a massive attack on Israel, and in which many non-combatants were murdered and raped, and then a huge military response. And there just seems to be a lack of objectivity about what steps were taken that should not have been taken, and what to do about those steps that were not taken. So those are just two or three of the many things that have gone on here. We've just negotiated a withdrawal from Niger because the general that took over Niger doesn't want the U.S. forces there anymore. He's got these Russian mercenaries, and they will help him fight off terrorists and keep control of the country that he took over illegally. So it's a very difficult situation, and you could just repeat that going around the world in different places. And the more you learn about it, the more awful you feel and helpless you feel, because ultimately the point I would make is that our rules concerning the use of force, the appropriate use of force, and limits on the use of force, our rules have been unrealistic in many ways. I've written about that extensively, and those rules have not been changed to make them more realistic. That's part of it, but also we haven't figured out how to convince states that it's in their interests to abide by the rules we all agree on.
Yeah, it's funny that on the sidelines here in the United States, people are watching the news, they see things happen around the world. They live in a world where there is law and order, right? I mean, when there's a problem, there's the police, or there's the National Guard, or we have the Army. And day to day, we don't see these types of things where there is just this indiscriminate violence without any repercussions. I say not repercussions. That there's no middleman. There's no there's no police to step in on behalf of the victims.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned Haiti, and we're all aware that Haiti is in a complete chaos with gangs taking over, and we're trying to figure out a way to help there. But that's been a problem since the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, when we had a long and extensive and detailed intervention where we tried very hard to help Haiti, which all fell apart after we left. So how do you deal with these problems? We still haven't learned how to deal with these problems and how to make a situation come closer to what we experience here, where we have a police force, we have a National Guard, and we, generally speaking, have a leadership that obeys the rules, the internal rules of our country. I hope that remains true. I'm not entirely confident that it will.
What do you mean?
Well, I've never seen as many people advocating things in this country even that would implicitly, if not explicitly, represent a rejection of the idea that our legal system would be the last word on the resolution of a contentious issue. And I think the most blatant example of that is the refusal of certain people, generally people who are supporting former President Trump, certain people, that they're not actually all saying they would not accept the result of an election, but they refuse to acknowledge that they would accept the result of an election. Now, that there's a little flexibility there in the sense that you could say, well, you want me to acknowledge the result of an election. I haven't had the election yet, and there might be something wrong done during the election. But everyone knows that when something wrong is done under the election, you can go to court in the United States. You can litigate that issue. And if you are right under the law and under the legal system that we have, you win. And if you're wrong, you lose. Now, it may well be that the good Lord someday in heaven, in the ultimate adjudication of these issues,
we don't want to wait for that.
maybe it would be concluded that you actually were right, even though the legal system in America decided you were wrong. That happens, I'm sure.
Sure.
That there is a percentage of times that our system is wrong. But, in order to have a system rather than chaos, we agree and we work on improving that system so that even though it isn't perfect, we know it's close enough to perfect that it's a lot more preferable to chaos. So what we say is, yes, we would accept the result of an election because an election in the United States implicitly suggests and requires that anyone with an interest, strong enough interest to bring a case about something wrong done in an election will be heard. And so it's very questionable in my mind for people to say that they will not accept that they are not willing to acknowledge that they will accept the result of an election because they are pretending. They're trying to create anxiety or the opening, perhaps, of a radical effort to reject an election that most people have accepted. And I'm just forwarding that to you. You asked me, why am I concerned even about America?
Right.
I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned when, President Trump brought 62 different cases to invalidate the last election, all of which resulted in judgments against the people who brought those cases that were made by judges that included judges appointed by President Trump.
That's a good point. Very strong.
But that they continue, some people continue to reject that election. And I think, even though I support many of the social and political objectives of the Trump administration, I continue to believe that it's very dangerous and wrong to fail to accept the acknowledged consequences of a legal system that we have in place to resolve our differences.
It seems like the barriers between the law enforcement and, well, I should say the judicial system and the political system, they've kind of, people are seeing as broken down. And this is a perspective, not that it actually is, where they don't see the difference. They think everybody else is scratching each other's back. I mean, there is this loss of faith in the system. It's not because the judiciary necessarily. There's 3 branches of government, right? And when government falls, or when people have a bad perspective, they question everything, all branches of government, because who's in charge here, right? Where does the buck stop?
Yes, and in their favor, they have the reality that when people get into political power, they appoint judges or they appoint attorney generals and they appoint people with power who agree with them.
Yes.
And that does happen. I mean, I know from having served in the Supreme Court, I was Justice Brennan's clerk, that political and value-oriented differences matter in the court.
Sure.
I was there when Chief Justice Warren and Justice Brennan and others pushed one agenda, and I've watched as I left the court, other agendas being pushed by other justices. But we have a way of dealing with that. Legislature can overturn many of the results of the court.
Right.
The court, the president himself can affect the extent to which the court can assert itself in the real world. Very hard for the court to actually control anything in the real world. They have marshals, but the marshals have no power to do
No,
major things.
the
And
executive
the
branch has
Constitution can be changed. We have a tax system that the court refused to accept initially. We have the regulation of alcohol that's very different from what the court had permitted. We have interstate commerce, which the court um, uh, uh, required, despite the positions of many states. So there's been a resolution of many things over time. It takes time,
right.
but the majority will of the American people tends to be implemented over time in a peaceful way. I mean, we had a
Right.
civil war. We could have a disaster.
No
Uh,
doubt.
we had a civil war over slavery, and maybe that was unavoidable. I think probably it was, but not all these things, all these differences are unavoidable. I think virtually any difference that we have among ourselves is resolvable through courts and through law and through legislation and through executive action and through the hard work that people on both sides of issues do. And that's what makes us strong and makes us very lucky to be here. Very lucky to be part of a system that doesn't have chaos and doesn't have murders going on all over the streets, gangs running wild, countries invading us at will, coming in like the Palestinians did from Gaza and murdering 1,200 people, or coming in like Putin does in Ukraine, or what. So these are things to be extremely grateful for. But it isn't just what God gave us; it's also what we built.
No doubt. No doubt.
And so, what I'm concerned about in the world, as the first question you asked me was, why can't we have more of this around the world, more of this feeling and attitude, and even more in the United States? Because right now we have some people questioning it, of a willingness to accept the system's conclusions, because the system is the best we've been able to do, and we do keep improving it. So there's no reason why we should feel that the system is inevitably going to be what it is today. We can improve it, but you don't improve it by falsifying records or
Right.
pretending that the Electoral College didn't actually meet. That's not how you improve it. You improve it by convincing people to do something different than what we're doing now. And you do that through the electoral process. And then you accept the results of that electoral process, because you can challenge the results within the legal process. And you accept the legal process, because if you don't, then there's chaos, because no one else will either soon enough. And you will lose every great thing that our forefathers have worked so hard to give us.
Yeah, it's funny, and the point that I think you're implying here too. Look, fortunately or unfortunately, people have a limited lifespan, right? So people also come and go, right? And it's not even for the entire life. There is a window of time where those involved in making decisions are active and around, right? And it's not that long. It's not 80 years. It's just often just a few years. And those people come and go. I mean, justices stay around. But there is a turnover in people who are in charge and who are in power and who run these organizations, not just the leadership, of course. They're extremely limited, right? 8 years total for a president. But that turns around. So what do you think is is it economic prosperity? It's a long belief in capitalism that if you can germinate economic prosperity in these contentious places around the world, that it will end up prospering there and spreading.
Now, that's a very old idea, David. Really, it's
Mhm.
been tried so many times and been asserted so many times. just before the First World War, there were many internationalists, Americans especially, who were running around the world saying, look, we're getting all these treaties, we're creating all these agencies, we're bringing all these countries into the World Health Organization or the World Agricultural Organization, and we're all going to be sharing information. We're going to be improving everyone's situation, and that's going to keep us from going to war with each other. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Of course, we should be doing those things, and they may have a marginal effect on the likelihood of some kind of a war, but it's not enough. You really do need a police force. You really do have people who are willing to blow everything up in order to have power themselves. You have situations that aren't governable through rational activities, and that the rational activities, like you and I, are very happy to have secure homes, decent income, enough to live on, and obviously we're going to be much more inclined as relatively rational people to keep a hold of that and to value that, and therefore to limit any inclination that we may have to hurt each other in order to get something that we may feel we don't have. But not everyone's like that. Some people have a lot. Some people are millionaires and they have everything you could possibly want in terms of economic benefits, but nonetheless, they lack the character and the emotional inclinations that are associated with normal behavior. And that is a reality in the world that you just have to deal with. And all these efforts are very good because they do help civilization when we help each other economically, when we have free trade. I mean, everyone's against free trade now. Just a little while ago, I was in an administration, H.W. Bush, before that Reagan, where we were building free trade because, as Milton Friedman properly pointed out, everyone gets richer with free trade. It's complicated. Some jobs are lost, some jobs are gained, but overall, everyone benefits. Now, here we are doing something, both parties are doing it, where we're cutting down on an overall benefit for various political reasons, largely, some allegedly economic reasons, which I think are real but can be negotiated, because these things you have to deal with in negotiations and in limited efforts to push people in the right direction.
Treaties and tariffs and things.
Yeah, but it seems we have given up on what the right direction is. The Second World War led us to the agreements that the right direction was increased trade, increased opportunities to buy a given product at a cheaper price, increased opportunities to build new products, increased opportunities for everybody to invest in each other's infrastructure or
development, education, everything.
But I think that that's broken down. There's now a general opposition to the kind of trade we had worked so hard to build. And there seems to be a general opposition not only to the different systems of political activity. Obviously, we don't approve of communism. We don't approve of tyranny in any form. We believe in a democratic government in which the people have an opportunity to elect their leaders in a free and honest way. That's what we believe in.
Right.
And so we know that. They know that. Everyone knows that. But that has not kept us from attempting to influence even governments that we don't approve of to cooperate with us and to behave in a manner that advances everybody's interest. And that's really what seems to be lacking today. There seems to be a bilateral within the U.S. system. There seems to be agreement by both Democrats and Republicans to treat a number of states, a number of leaders as, people and governments that we so much do not trust. We don't want to have anything to do with them. Now, of course, China is our biggest trade partner. It's a big problem. And if we actually follow through on this, we will be impoverishing not only China, but ourselves. So this is very hard stuff. And we need our presidents to get a hold of this. And we need to learn how to handle it again, because we do know how to handle it. Our economists know how to do this. We've got real experts who know how to negotiate trade deals. And the same thing, David, is true in immigration. I mean, what's going on now is a catastrophic mix of illegal immigration, that is, people coming into this country against the law of the United States, or with a twisting of the law so that it's being used in manners that were never anticipated, such as the rule of allowing people to, once they're in the country, they can claim asylum.
Sure.
And that enables them to stay for years, and then the whole thing falls apart over time.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, and then on the other hand, people saying, we're not going to let anyone in. We're going to close everything down. We're going to collect millions of people and deport them. And, there's truth and wisdom to both sides' positions.
Sure.
And we've got to find a way in a rational society to take those truths and that wisdom and to merge them into a system that is legally effective, but at the same time lets in people that we need. We need people to do work in this country. We need talented people to do IT and AI and all these other things that we are so successful at attracting some of the best talent in the world.
Mm-hmm.
We need to let people have their parents come and live with them, because that's a value that legislatively we've recognized as a humane and important value. And
It's also social science. I mean, it's better to have families around. There's less crime when mommy's there with you, right?
So
I mean, let's be
we're not
real.
going to be able to do everything in one shot, but we ought to be able to work together to, keep the system respectable. Because if it loses respect, we have one form of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And if it gains the respect that you would have in a tyranny, you have another form of chaos. And both are dangerous. And so that's what's going on within the United States. And, so back to your original question, how do I feel about the world? In the world, you may have countries, you have some in Eastern Europe and others, which they don't let anybody in.
Yep.
And they are moving toward being tyrannies. And that's, even more dangerous than what we have. So it's and then of course the outright violence that's going on in many places. We do absolutely need to be more realistic about what's achievable, what are the rules that we should insist upon, and stop exaggerating the obligations of states so that we don't always end up with a failure on our report card.
No doubt. I mean, look at Afghanistan. I mean, there are ways of handling things. I mean, Afghanistan is a real sore point in my heart. I mean, that we created this essential relative utopia there. I mean, there were women, children, girls going to school, and women taking places of power. And now it went completely backwards just because we left, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how can we even look at the world with a proud face and try to help solve their problems when we have these ultimate failures?
So this goes back to your point about how a leader will serve for a certain number of years and might adopt a policy that's rational and
Yes.
good. And then another one will come along and say, "Oh, I want out of there." And everything collapses. And no, there was a general who operated in Afghanistan for many years, and he just said, it was yesterday or day before yesterday, that he had advised both Trump and Biden that they should not suddenly pull our troops out of Afghanistan, because things were delicate there, and we would lose all the good we had done in Afghanistan very quickly if we did that. And sure, of course, that's what happened. We had two leaders who didn't want to take responsibility for Afghanistan, even though we had discovered that if we had a limited force in Afghanistan, if we supported a limited army within a limited area of Afghanistan, and we used our air force to hold off the Taliban, we could actually operate indefinitely, potentially, at a relatively low cost, without a single American casualty. And this took a lot of years to reach that conclusion. And nonetheless, because of the years in which things really did go badly, and in which a lot of people, including myself, wanted, to have as little to do with Afghanistan as possible.
Sure.
But gradually, we came to this realization and this balance. But then it was torn down. And as you said, was really a humanitarian catastrophe for all those people who trusted us during those years, that what the improvements in their lives that we had done so much to implement were being torn down and discarded so lightly.
And it's an example of what I talked about earlier and this is relatively similar, is showing prosperity in these places. And that is relative prosperity, a prosperous life, education, just safety, just basic safety we were giving them. And why couldn't that be contagious?
Well, so it could have been. And I think, we do have to find a way to get rid of a corrupt leader in a country like that we're supporting. And we weren't good enough at that in Afghanistan, that's for sure. And of course, we weren't good enough for that in Vietnam as well. But that is an overall problem that we do need to look at very seriously. First of all, we need to realize, what you said is so important. We need to realize that when we get involved in a place, that we is a differentiated number of people. We are not, Clinton or George W. Bush. We are Clinton, George W. Bush, Trump, and Biden. We're all of those. And so we better not make decisions on the assumption that everything is going to be followed in the same way by every leader. And we need to be very careful to have everybody on board and to develop systems that have a broad acceptance and legitimacy. And that is not, we've really not learned how to do that.
It's so hard to put that into policy. It takes me back to Little League Baseball and it seems funny, but it's absolutely true, where these children come in for a number of years, the parents come in, there's a very limited number of rules, the parents take over, and there is a bit of tyranny, I will tell you. right? And there's some years I spent coaching Little League baseball. 30 years as a lawyer, it was the singular most stressful thing I've done in my life, right? Unreasonable people show up and there's all this chaos, but then they move on.
Yeah.
And new people show up. They're good, they're bad. Some of the one in my kid is now is awesome. They're very principled people. But how do you enact these policies? And in that context, it's if you don't make a rule that specifically says that you cannot do a certain thing, they're going to keep doing whatever they want to do. Right? I mean, codifying that, how you do this. I mean, you think of, the infinite different types of circumstances we could come upon. But what could be the fundamental policies that we could keep any number of presidents in line where we don't keep making these same mistakes? It's not just right either, right? They can't say, oh, well, this has never happened before. How can it possibly? No, this has all happened before. We're reliving history over and over again.
But part of the solution is to realize how difficult it is to bring about that kind of a stable situation. There are such stable situations. So far, we have committed ourselves to NATO, for example.
Right.
And I'm hoping that if Trump becomes president again, he will continue to have that commitment. We're certainly so far committed to South Korea. We have alliances with Japan and Australia and other countries of that sort, England especially, where we are deeply committed and resolved to stay friends with them. Israel, and maybe Saudi Arabia now. There's a lot of talk about getting closer to Saudi Arabia in a meaningful way. Now, when we do that successfully, it's highly advantageous. But we do have to realize in advance that many, many of the efforts that we make to do that successfully have failed. And they often fail because of a lack of similar values between the leadership of the country that we're trying to help and our leadership and our country. So in a place like Iraq, for example, I was foolish enough, and I regret it. I favored getting rid of Saddam. And I thought, in fact, the commitment was made by the Bush administration that we would not stay indefinitely in Iraq, that we would be much more closer to George H.W. Bush's position and Baker's position, which was sound, and that is do what you need to do and get out.
Yeah.
Then we would be to the notion that we would be able to somehow change the values and governing principles of a country that was so different from ours, and in which the Shia-Sunni division had not been resolved in the constructive, principled way in which we've resolved other similar, analogous situations, sometimes through a civil war, here in our country. So I thought, well, we'll do this. We'll go in, we'll get rid of Saddam, and we will get out. Well, I was wrong. The people who said that we would do that and that the whole thing would cost us $5 billion.
Oh boy.
Yes, right. They either were wrong at the time they spoke or they were misleading us. I don't believe that they were deliberately misleading us. I don't think they realized how difficult it would be to make that kind of change in Iraq. But the fact is that we stayed way beyond where we could. We took over sovereign power of Iraq, literally took over the sovereignty of a country that we had knew so little about, had so little ability to impact. We took over the sovereign power. Eventually, this caused many countries to stop supporting what we were doing, including countries like France, India, people we respect.
Long-term allies.
Yeah. And they said, what are you doing? I mean, you're just doing the wrong thing. And of course, by then I had already realized, oh my goodness, we really, this is not what we were supposed to do. And of course, the whole thing is just a disaster that cost us much closer to $5 trillion. And we're still in there with troops and the Iranians lobbing bombs into our residences, our troop residences, and apparently harming the mental abilities of some people with the explosions and some of our soldiers. I don't, it's really hard. We really have to be much more humble about what situations we have any good prospect of being able to affect in a positive way over time, and what situations in which we could help a little bit in a limited way for a short time and improve so that maybe others can take over and help. I mean, Haiti would be an example of the latter right now. Anyone who thinks you can go into Haiti and change Haiti is nuts.
No,
I mean,
you can't clear the debt. There are people who still live there.
Absolutely. But we could help. We could help an international force of some kind to stabilize Haiti and maybe bring it to a different situation where there wouldn't be so much cruelty and so much human harm and devastation. We can help. But sometimes you can help with, and that's you should. And as long as you don't get dragged into something where you're not really helping anymore, you're hurting everybody, including especially yourself.
Right. And the people that you're trying to help.
Exactly.
Well, hey, this last word, Abe. Any words of wisdom for whoever wins this next election and takes over the administration of the United States?
Well, I mean, I think the framers have said it over and over again. The strength of this country depends on, first of all, not having tyranny. Tyranny is where one branch of the government controls the others. And no president should ever seek to be a tyrant and seek to control both the legislature and the courts. So that's the first principle. It's the principle of our Constitution, the division of powers, the way we did it. We've made it very complicated, maybe, I hope, impossible to have a tyrant. And the second thing is, all men are created equal with fundamental natural rights given to us by the Lord and by nature, whatever it is you believe in. So we have taken those two positions, and without those two fundamental positions, no tyranny and equality, we would be lost. So we have to hold firm to those ideals, treating each other respectfully and making sure no government that we have ever is allowed to become a tyrannical government. Those are the two things I would say. Gentlemen, pay heed to the basics. Those are the two basic things. And beyond that, you could fight about immigration. You could fight about this or that, the court system, who's going to get appointed. Go ahead, have a ball. But as long as you hold on to those two principles, that treat people are equal under the law, and that we cannot ever have a tyrant in America, we're okay.
So here you have it for the first time. Innovation in politics starts with going back to first principles. Well said, Dave.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone's ever run this country better than our framers.
Well said. Thanks for being on Innovator Cafe, Gabe.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been tuning into Innovator Cafe, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website StevensLawGroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.